The 5-minute kitchen clean everyone talks about is not the whole truth. She hasn't scrubbed her kitchen back into shape in 20 years, and she didn't learn that from a book. The 5 minutes is real, but it only exists because of one harder afternoon, the same way her grandmother taught her in a farmhouse in Tōno. My name is Mika Sato, and I raised 5 children in a small Sendai apartment, on one income, with no cleaner, ever. Tonight I'll show you the one decision that makes a kitchen put itself away, so your reset takes 5 minutes instead of a whole Saturday. Here's how it goes for most people, and I suspect it's gone this way for you too. You clear the counters on a Saturday morning, you wipe down every surface, and you stand back feeling proud of what you did. Then Tuesday comes, and the counter has a stack of mail on it again, and a cutting board that never made it back to the drawer. By Friday, the whole kitchen has slid halfway back to where it started. That's not because you got lazy between Saturday and Friday. It's because the kitchen was never actually fixed. It was only pushed back into place for a moment, the way you'd push a couch back against a wall that keeps tipping over anyway. The couch doesn't stay because you pushed it. It stays because something underneath it changed. I watched women my whole life try to organize a kitchen by working harder at cleaning it, and I understood something plain and a little uncomfortable the year I finally stopped doing that myself. A kitchen doesn't get clean by being cleaned more often. It gets clean when putting something back in its place is easier than leaving it out on the counter. When that's true, the kitchen fixes itself every single day, without you standing over it with a rag in your hand. This was never about willpower, and it was never about how hard you scrub. Most kitchens are set up so that returning an item takes a small decision, whether it has room, where exactly it goes, or if someone else already filled that spot. A decision like that, made 40 times a day, every day, is tiring in a way that finally just stops happening, and the things stay out. It's not because you're careless, it's because the kitchen asked you to think 40 times a day, and nobody keeps that up forever. 5 children came through that kitchen while I ran it alone, with no family nearby to help me, and no money to spare for shortcuts. I can tell you plainly that no amount of scrubbing ever fixed the real problem. It filled up again because nothing in it had ever been told exactly where it belonged. That's the part nobody explains to you before selling you another bin. Fix that one thing, and most of the daily mess stops creating itself. I didn't learn this from a course, and I didn't learn it from a magazine either. I learned it from my grandmother, Fumiko, in a farmhouse in Tōno, up in the mountains of Tohoku. The winters came in hard there, and nothing got thrown away, because nothing could be replaced easily. If you wasted something in that house, you felt it later, usually in January, and you didn't forget the feeling. There's a word for the way my grandmother lived, though she never once used it herself. It's called danshari, and a woman named Hideko Yamashita gave it that name in a book she wrote back in 2009. 3 ideas sit inside that one word. Refuse the thing before it ever enters your house. Let go of what no longer serves the life you're actually living, not the life you used to have or the one you're still hoping for. And stop tying who you are to what you own. You may have heard of a gentler cousin of this idea, the one that asks whether something sparks joy. That one has its place. But the question I grew up with was blunter. It wasn't, does this spark joy? It was, do I actually use this, right now, in the life I'm living today? That question doesn't leave much room for the gadget you bought once and used twice. My grandmother never explained any of this the way I just explained it to you. She simply lived it, and I lived close enough beside her, long enough, that it became the only way I knew how to run a kitchen. There's another framework you'll sometimes hear about that comes out of a Japanese factory floor rather than a farmhouse, called the 5S method. Sort what you keep, set a place for it, keep it clean, and practice that order until it runs on its own. Toyota built that for a factory line. But it maps onto a kitchen just as well, because a kitchen is really just a small factory for feeding your family. I need to be honest with you before I go one step further, because I've never once told a woman something untrue just to keep her watching. What I'm about to describe isn't 5 minutes. It might take you an afternoon, or it might take you a few, spread across a couple of weekends. Do it a shelf at a time, while a child naps or a pot simmers on the stove. That's the real work, and nobody gets to skip it. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something. Start with one zone, not the whole kitchen at once. Just the mug shelf, or the drawer full of spatulas and can openers and things you can't quite name. Pull every item of that one kind out onto the counter. All the mugs together, all the oils together, all the gadgets together. Now you see the whole pile at once, instead of guessing at it, one cabinet at a time, and most people are shocked the first time they do this. You're staring at 11 mugs, 4 half-used bottles of the same oil, and a drawer of gadgets that haven't been touched since the box they came in. Once you can see the whole pile, ask one plain question about each thing in it. Do I use this in my life right now? Not the life I used to have? and not some hoped-for life where I finally cook the way the box promised? If the answer is no, it leaves, whether it's a duplicate, a single-use gadget, or a chipped mug that never gets picked up anymore. I'd rather you gave these things away than threw them out. Somebody else's shelf might still have use in them, and there's an old feeling in me that hates waste more than it hates clutter, but gone is gone one way or the other. Now comes the step that does almost all of the work. So give this part more of your attention than any other. Everything that's left gets exactly one home, not a general area or somewhere in this cabinet, but one exact spot, close to where you actually use it. The knives live by the cutting board, not clear across the kitchen, and the mugs live by the kettle, not in a cupboard you need a stool to reach. If putting something away means stopping to think about where it goes, the system has already failed. It will fail again tomorrow, and every day after that. Make the storage itself shallow, and make it visible. A deep cabinet is where things go to be forgotten, and forgotten things get bought again. So now you own 3 of something you thought you owned none of. Shallow shelves and clear bins mean you see everything at a glance, and there's a second benefit hiding inside the first one. A shallow shelf only holds so much, and once it's full, it tells you plainly that something has to leave before something new comes in. That limit does some of your future discipline for you, without you having to think about it again. Last, clear the counters down to 1 or 2 things you reach for every single day. Everything else goes behind a door. My grandmother's kitchen never had much sitting out, and I used to think that was only because she owned so little, but it wasn't that. She understood something plain, that a cluttered counter makes a whole kitchen look dirty even on the day you cleaned it top to bottom. Clear counters are the thing that makes a kitchen read as calm before anyone even opens a drawer. My eldest daughter, Aoi, was the one who tested this system first, in her own place, and she called me a few weeks in, half annoyed, to admit that she couldn't find a single reason it wasn't working. My son Soda pushed back on it hardest of anyone in our house, the way he pushed back on most things. But even he settled into it once he saw that putting a thing away had gotten easier than leaving it out. Once every single thing in that kitchen has exactly one home, something changes that you won't fully believe until you live inside it for a week. The kitchen starts behaving differently, and not because you're managing it harder. Because you built it so it barely needs managing at all. Here's what changes once every item has one home. Putting something away stops being a decision and starts being closer to a reflex. It's no different from how you don't think about where your feet land on a staircase you've climbed 1,000 times. That's the whole secret behind the 5 minutes, and it was sitting inside the harder afternoon the entire time. There's a small habit my grandmother folded into the middle of ordinary work, and it has a name too. Suidini, which means something close to while you're at it. You wipe the stovetop while the kettle comes to a boil. You put the drying rack away while the rice finishes steaming. None of it costs extra time because you were already standing there waiting on something else. The mess never gets the chance to pile up because you're clearing it in the dead minutes that were going to be wasted anyway. Then comes the actual 5 minutes, the part the title of this video promised you, and I'm not going to make you wait any longer for it. After the meal is over, give the kitchen one short pass. Dishes go to their spot. The counter gets wiped. Whatever came out during cooking goes back to the one home it already has. 3 minutes some nights, 5 on a harder night, with a timer on the counter if that helps you stay honest with yourself. The trick that makes this stick isn't willpower either. It's naming the moment exactly, not, I want a tidy kitchen, which is too vague to ever act on, but I clear this counter for 5 minutes after dinner every night. Researchers who study how people follow through on things have found something simple. People who name the exact when and how of a task are far more likely to actually do it, instead of just wanting the outcome in a general way. Your grandmother didn't need a study to know that. She only knew that a vague wish never emptied a sink, and a named habit, done at the same moment, every night, eventually stopped feeling like a chore at all. So, here's the plain truth of the 5-minute kitchen clean, the one I promised you at the very start of this video. It was never a lie, and it was never a trick either. It's the second half of something. The first half is an afternoon of hard, deliberate work, done once. The second half is 5 minutes a night forever, because that afternoon already did the deciding for you. I still set that same short window every night, 20 years on, and it still works the way it did the first month I built it. Some nights it stretches closer to 7 or 8 minutes, with 5 children running through a small kitchen. But it never creeps back into an hour-long scrub, let alone a whole Saturday, because the hard part was already finished a long time ago. And I built all of this in a kitchen you'd probably call too small to bother organizing at all. Some of what I'm describing came out of Japan, simply because there wasn't a choice. A lot of kitchens in cities like Tokyo are barely bigger than a closet, small enough that you could stand in the middle of one and touch both walls without stretching. When a whole country cooks in spaces that tight, you don't get to organize with acreage. You get clever instead, and most of what came out of that necessity works just as well in a much bigger kitchen back home. There's a narrow rolling cart built to fit the strip of empty space between a fridge and a cabinet, sometimes a gap no wider than your handspan. It turns dead space into a spice rack or a small pantry. There's a dish rack made to sit right over the sink instead of beside it, so drying dishes never eats up counter space at all. Tension rods, the kind you twist to fit without a single screw or nail, turn an awkward gap into a shelf overnight. A strip of magnet on the wall holds your knives in plain sight, instead of buried in a drawer where you're fishing around blade first. A turntable inside a deep corner cabinet means the oil bottle at the back comes to you, instead of you climbing halfway into the cabinet after it. Plain, matching, see-through containers for rice, flour, and pasta do two things at once. You always know what you have, and a shelf full of matching containers looks calm even while holding the exact same amount of food it always did. A hook screwed under a cabinet holds the mugs you use every morning, right above the counter where you pour the coffee. Instead of stacked in a cupboard you have to reach over the stove to get to. Down in the lower cabinets, a shallow pull-out shelf means the pot at the very back stops being the pot you forget you own. A simple divider inside a drawer keeps the lids from sliding into a pile you have to dig through every single time you need one, and it costs almost nothing to build with a scrap of wood or a cheap plastic insert. None of this needs to be expensive, and it was never meant to be. My grandmother's whole approach came out of a farmhouse with almost no money in it. And the Japanese habit that grew from that leans toward cheap and plain. Think a bin from a 100-yen shop, the kind of store you'd find all over a city like Sendai, not a matching set from a boutique. If a system only works with pricey organizers, it isn't really a system. It's just clutter with better packaging. Now I want to be honest with you, just as honest as I'd be with my own daughter if she asked me this. This won't undo 10 years of clutter in an afternoon, and it certainly won't do it in 5 minutes. If your kitchen has been collecting things for a decade, the first pass-through it's going to take real time. And it might take more than one weekend. Anyone telling you different is telling you what you want to hear, not what's true. Skip the hard part and only try the 5-minute reset on its own, and it won't hold either. I've watched people try exactly that, wiping a counter every night without ever giving the drawer behind it a real home for what's inside. Within a month, the same pile is back, because the reset was never the thing doing the work. The one-time build was. There's a stricter rule underneath all of this, one my grandmother held tighter than the tidying itself. Let new things keep coming into the kitchen without anything else leaving, and the whole system slides back to where it started, just with newer things instead of older ones. Before something new comes in, something else has to go out. Even after you've built it, don't expect it to feel finished right away. The first week, you'll still catch yourself reaching for the old spot out of habit, or standing in front of an empty patch of counter wondering where something went. And that's normal. It took your kitchen years to learn its old habits, and it takes a few weeks, not one afternoon, for the new ones to feel automatic. None of that should scare you off from trying it. It should only mean you go in with your eyes open, knowing the first afternoon is real work, so that when it's hard, you don't quit halfway through and decide the whole thing doesn't work. Here's a plain thing I've noticed, and I don't say it to be bitter about it. Most of what gets sold to you about organizing a kitchen is built to be bought again. A new bin this spring, a new cart once that one wears out, a fresh round of decluttering advice dressed up new every January. A kitchen that's actually fixed doesn't need a follow-up sale. A system where everything already has one home doesn't need a new product next season. It needs you to finish the afternoon once, and that's not a good business to be in if you're selling storage. I understand why it isn't the story you hear most often. My grandmother had a word for the feeling behind all of this too, matanai. It's a kind of quiet regret at letting something go to waste, whether it's food or fabric or an afternoon spent buying a bin you didn't need. That feeling is the opposite of the one most organizing content is trying to sell you. It doesn't want you buying more, it wants you needing less, and fixing what you already have so it finally does its job. I'm not selling you anything today, and I never have been. I don't have a certification, and I never trained under anyone with a title. What I have is a kitchen that's looked the same for 20 years, and an apartment I've shared with 5 children and 1 husband, on 1 income. I never once hired someone to come fix what I could learn to fix myself. That's not a marketing claim. That's only what happened day after day because I had to make it work. Build it once, and the 5 minutes takes care of itself, the same way it has in my kitchen for 20 years. This week, don't take on the whole kitchen. Pick 1 drawer, 1 shelf, 1 small zone, and give everything in it exactly 1 home. Come back and tell me what you found when you pulled it all out. I'd like to know I wasn't the only one who was shocked by 11 mugs.